He once dined on golden plates and flew private jets just to escape the rain. His name echoed in luxury lounges, and his wealth seemed infinite. But now, barefoot and ragged, he begs for scraps outside the very hotel he once owned. What happened? This is not just a story of bankruptcy. This is a tale of ego, betrayal, and a descent into a reality darker than fiction. And no, it's not someone else's nightmare. It's his. Adrian Wallace wasn't born into wealth. He wasn't born into anything at all. His earliest memories weren't of birthday parties or bedtime stories. They were of empty cupboards, eviction notices, and a mother with eyes too tired to cry. On the edge of Detroit, where abandoned houses whispered the secrets of forgotten families, Adrian learned young that the world didn't owe him a damn thing. But maybe, just maybe, he could take what it wouldn't give Dot by the age of 13. Adrian was already selling candy bars at school, not to raise money for a cause, but to pay for electricity at home. His classmates laughed, called him Ghetto Gordon Gekko, but Adrian didn't care. Every dollar was a brick in the empire. He planned to build. And build he did. In his 20s, Adrian discovered real estate. Not the glossy, polished kind you see in magazines, but the rotting carcasses of houses left behind by the 2008 financial collapse. He bought cheap, flipped fast, and sold high. Within 5 years, he wasn't just flipping homes, he was constructing. Glass towers downtown, reshaping Detroit's skyline, and shaking hands with senators. The city called him the Comeback Kid. Forbes dubbed him Detroit's Prince. His face was on billboards, his voice echoed on business podcasts, and his cars, custom Lamborghinis and bulletproof Escalades, roared through the city like thunder. People saw Adrian and thought, genius, legend, king. But behind the marble walls of his penthouse, the cracks had already begun. Adrian wasn't just hungry for success, he was addicted to it. Every new deal had to be bigger. Every party had to be wilder. He threw rooftop galas with champagne waterfalls, hired celebrities to perform private shows, and once, on a drunken dare, flew his friends to Paris just for breakfast. Yet not all wealth is created clean. Adrian's shortcuts started small, delaying payments to contractors, fudging numbers for investors. Nothing serious, he told himself, just playing the game. But as the towers grew taller, so did the lies. He began securing loans on projects he hadn't even started, promising returns on properties that didn't exist. The money poured in faster than he could count, and he spent it just as quickly. By the time he turned 35, Adrian Wallace had amassed a net worth estimated at $180 million. But if someone had looked closely, really closely, they would have seen it. The hollow core beneath the empire. A castle built on fog. Still, Adrian lived like a king. He had chefs from Italy, bodyguards from Israel, and mistresses from Monaco. His world was silk sheets and six-figure watches. He dined at restaurants where a single glass of wine cost more than his mother's old house. And he never looked back, until one night at a charity gala he was hosting at the Grand Lux hotel he owned, Adrian ran into a face from the past, a quiet woman with haunted eyes. Her name was Lena. She was his high school sweetheart, the only person who had ever loved him before the money. She wasn't impressed by his empire. She wasn't seduced by his Rolex. All she asked was, "Are you happy, Adrian?" He laughed it off, told her he had everything a man could want. But that night, as he stood alone in his penthouse, with the city lights flickering like dying stars, Adrian realized something strange. He couldn't answer her question, because deep down, under all the wealth, the noise, and the gold, he knew he wasn't, and worse. He didn't know why. Asterisk. The illusion of control is the cruelest of deceptions. And Adrian Wallace had mastered it on the surface. To the outside world, he was still the king of steel and glass. The man who resurrected neighborhoods and turned empty lots into million-dollar vistas. But inside, he was scrambling. His accounts, though heavy with numbers, were filled with borrowed air. His companies were technically solvent, but only because of a series of financial gymnastics that would make Wall Street veterans sweat. Adrian had become a maestro of manipulation. He leveraged one property to fund another, juggled investors, capital between projects like casino chips, and paid off old debts with new loans disguised as venture opportunities. It wasn't fraud, not exactly, but it wasn't honest either. And with each month, the line blurred further. The deeper he went, the more dangerous the game became. It started with a call from a London-based hedge fund, Delcroft Holdings. They were interested in one of Adrian's skyscrapers, the Aurora. The catch? The building was still a hole in the ground. But Adrian, ever the performer, gave them a tour of a different building, doctored the paperwork, and sold them on a vision that didn't exist. Delcroft wired $15 million upfront. With that money, Adrian threw a birthday bash for himself that made headlines. Ice sculptures, imported snow in July, a $2.3 million necklace gifted to a woman whose name he couldn't recall the next day. It was a parade of excess, a mask to hide the mounting fear behind his eyes. People around him began to notice. His CFO, Martin, who had been with him since the beginning, asked for a private meeting. "Adrian, we need to slow down," he warned. "We're too exposed." One audit and nothing," Adrian snapped. "This is how billionaires are made. You play safe, you die broke." Martin resigned 2 days later. Then came the phone call that changed everything. A woman claiming to be from the SEC wanted to clarify discrepancies regarding investor reports. Adrian played it cool, but his stomach churned with every word. He called his lawyers. They told him to remain calm but prepared. At night, the silence of the penthouse felt heavier. He stopped sleeping. His dreams turned into chaotic flashes, reporters shouting questions. Lena's eyes filled with disappointment, Martin walking away. He began drinking to dull the noise. First scotch, then pills, then both. He showed up late to meetings, slurred words in interviews, and made erratic decisions that worried his board. But in public, he was still untouchable. The media loved him. Local politicians begged for his donations. He was on the cover of Fortune again, smiling in a custom tuxedo beneath the headline, "The Visionary of Detroit." No one saw the letters piling up at his office. Lawsuits, investor demands, audit requests. And no one knew about the woman named Gabrielle. She appeared during the chaos, young, cunning, beautiful in a way that made men forget themselves. She claimed to be a financial consultant, said she'd worked with billionaires. Adrian, desperate and blinded by his own ego, hired her on the spot. She became his confidant, his fixer. She promised to make the money invisible. She moved assets offshore, created ghost companies, falsified timelines. Adrian didn't ask how. He didn't want to know. All he wanted was silence, a break from the growing thunder in his head. But Gabrielle wasn't who she said she was. One morning, Adrian woke up to find her gone, along with $3.6 million in liquid funds. No note, no trace. Just a USB drive on the kitchen counter. When he plugged it in, all he found was a single file, an audio recording of him admitting to investor fraud. She had been working for someone else. Maybe the feds, maybe a rival, maybe a ghost from the past. That's when the panic truly began. Adrian locked himself in, refused interviews, fired his PR team, spent nights pacing the marble floors barefoot, whispering to himself like a man already trapped in his own tomb. And through it all, the question echoed louder each day. Who was watching him now? Because someone was. Of that, he was certain. The empire didn't collapse in silence. It exploded. It began with whispers. A blog post from an anonymous whistleblower alleging misappropriation of investor funds. The article had no hard evidence, but the accusations were damning. Within hours, it was shared by financial influencers, picked up by minor news sites, and finally reached the eyes of a major publication. By morning, Adrian Wallace's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. CNN called it a brewing storm in the world of real estate finance. The Wall Street Journal published a full-page expose titled, "The Mirage of Adrian Wallace, Success or Sophisticated Scam?" Stock in one of his public ventures plummeted 37% in a single day. Emails flooded in. Angry investors, concerned partners, former employees demanding answers, but worse than the press. Were the knockings at his door. Agents from the Securities and Exchange Commission, this time not calling politely, but arriving with warrants. Computers were seized. Bank accounts frozen. Files taken. Adrian, in his silk robe and sunglasses, stood dumbfounded as strangers dissected the kingdom he built piece by piece. "Mr. Wallace," one of the agents said quietly, "this isn't personal, but it's going to get ugly." And it did. Lawsuits rained down like arrows. A class action suit from Delcroft Holdings. A federal investigation into wire fraud and securities violations. His legal team, once a battalion of high-powered sharks, began backing away one by one. As payments stopped and invoices piled up, the media frenzy grew savage. Reporters camped outside his residence. Camera drones hovered over his balcony. Every move he made was dissected, every ex-lover interviewed, every employee interrogated. They called him a con man in couture, a mirror maze of modern greed. The city that once hailed him now turned its back. The mayor issued a public statement denouncing his developments. Half-finished towers became urban ruins, draped in graffiti and shame. Construction halted. Workers laid off. Small investors, many who had trusted Adrian with their life savings, filed for bankruptcy. Even those who had once admired him now spat his name like a curse. And then came the final blow, foreclosure. His penthouse, once the pinnacle of Detroit's luxury, was repossessed. The Grand Lux Hotel, his crown jewel, was seized by the bank. Cars disappeared. Art was auctioned. Every corner of his life was stripped and sold. It was no longer about justice. It was spectacle. And still, Adrian denied everything. In court. He was defiant, arrogant, clinging to the image of the man he used to be. "These people made their own choices," he shouted during one hearing. "I didn't force anyone to believe in me." But the judge wasn't impressed. He was sentenced to 3 years of probation, a massive fine, and a lifetime ban from managing investor funds. No jail time yet. But what remained of his wealth was gone. His reputation annihilated. When the media turned to the next scandal, Adrian was left in silence. His phone no longer rang. His inbox was empty. The so-called friends who once praised his genius had evaporated. Lena stopped answering his texts. Martin changed his number. And Gabrielle, if that was even her real name, was never seen again. One night, Adrian stood outside the fence of the Aurora, now half-built, abandoned, rotting. He stared at the steel skeleton, the empty glass shelves reflecting nothing but regret. A security guard recognized him, but didn't say a word, just stared. The kind of stare reserved for ghosts. Adrian turned away and walked into the darkness. He had fallen, yes. But what no one realized, not yet, was that this wasn't the end, that it was just the beginning of something far more tragic. Asterisk. He never thought it would come to this. 2 winters after the collapse, Adrian Wallace, once worth millions, Once the face of Detroit's revival now shuffled down alleys like a ghost. The tailored suits were long gone. So were the cars, the penthouses, the dinners that could feed families for a week. All that remained was a frayed coat, a hollow stare, and a backpack filled with fragments of a life no one believed he'd lived. He slept beneath overpasses, in church vestibules, behind dumpsters, sometimes no more than 10 feet from luxury condos he once helped design. The same city that once celebrated him now ignored him. Pedestrians passed without a glance. Security guards no longer saluted, they threatened. People said things like, "Another junkie," or "Get a job," never knowing who he was. But he wasn't a junkie, at least, not at first. The hunger came first. Real hunger. The kind that makes your bones feel hollow and your stomach rage like a wounded animal. Then came the cold. Michigan cold, sharp, cruel, unrelenting. He stole a blanket from a donation box one night and wept while clutching it beneath a bridge. Not from shame. From the memory, the blanket was from the Grand Lux, his hotel. Embroidered with his initials, he tried shelters. But shelters were chaos fights, theft, confection. He'd once spent $40,000 on a bed imported from Italy. Now, a corner of dry concrete was luxury. He begged for food. At first, reluctantly, then with growing detachment. When someone handed him a sandwich, he said, "Thank you," like a robot, his pride already too broken to resist. Then came the voices, not from inside his head, at least not yet. These voices were real. Old business partners whispering about his downfall. A distant cousin laughing at his disgrace. Strangers asking, "Is that really him?" At first, he avoided eye contact. But one day, while scavenging behind a Whole Foods, he heard a voice he couldn't ignore. Adrian? It was Lena. She stood there in a wool coat, holding 2 shopping bags, staring like she was seeing a ghost, and maybe she was. Her eyes welled, and she didn't speak for a long time. He tried to joke. "Guess I'm not on the Forbes list anymore," but his voice cracked, brittle from days of silence. She didn't laugh. She knelt down and handed him the bag. Warm food, bottled water, gloves. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "I already did," he replied. There's nothing left, but there was something worse than hunger. Worse than cold. Revenge. Someone was watching him. He felt it. At first, he thought it was paranoia. But then came the photos. Polaroids slipped into his bag while he slept. Of him begging. Of him passed out near a subway vent. One photo had a note. "I was there when you laughed. I'm here now." Then the letters. Handwritten. Ink smeared. Some pages soaked in something red paint or maybe blood. No signature. Just pages filled with phrases like, "You ruined my family. You deserve to choke. I'm going to finish what the feds didn't." He changed sleeping spots. Burned the letters, but they kept coming. Sometimes left in places no one else knew he'd be. Someone knew his every move. It was Gabrielle. Or someone she'd sold him out to. His mind unraveled in loops. Was it a former investor? A contractor he stiffed? One of the hundreds he'd deceived? Names spiraled in his head like a Rolodex of rage. He started seeing shadows, jumping at noises, muttering to himself like the others on the street. But he kept the letters. Even as he feared them, they were proof that someone remembered, that someone still cared, if only to destroy him. Then came the night he almost died. It was a Friday. Snow was falling, heavy and wet. He was sleeping behind a closed nightclub when someone doused him with something cold. He woke up gasping. The figure stood above him, hooded, silent, then disappeared. He never saw their face, but he knew the message. Next time, it'll be fire. Adrian fled. Not just the spot, but the city. He walked for hours, then days, sleeping on trains, hiding in parks. He wanted to disappear completely, not to survive, just to vanish. And yet, something strange began to happen. In the absence of power, of money, of ego, something else emerged. A faint whisper in the silence, not forgiveness, not hope, but clarity. For the first time, he saw what he had become, and what he had lost long before the fall. The first time he saw the flyer, he thought it was a joke. Second chances, shelter, work, dignity. No questions asked. It was stapled crookedly to a lamppost outside a train station in Cleveland. Adrian had arrived there without a plan. Just a desperate need to outrun his past and a few crumpled dollars he'd begged during a snowstorm. He almost walked past it, almost ignored it like the dozens of outreach ads littering the streets. But the words, "no questions asked," lingered. That night, with nowhere else to go and frostbite threatening his toes, he walked into the shelter. What he found wasn't salvation. It was structure, cots in a basement, chores in exchange for food, counseling sessions where no one cared about his last name. The man running it was named Malcolm, a former Wall Street trader who had once lost everything to cocaine and bad bets. Malcolm never asked who Adrian was, just handed him a mop and said, "If you're staying clean." And for once Adrian obeyed. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. He washed dishes, repaired walls, sat in silence during group therapy sessions. He didn't speak of the past. Not at first. But slowly, through the numb rhythm of labor and sleep, something cracked open. He began to tell pieces of the story. First to Malcolm, then to the group. Not the headline version. Not the glamorous myth, but the truth, the small betrayals. The compulsive lying, the loneliness, the fear. The worst part wasn't losing the money. It was realizing he had never actually been happy, not even at the top. Then, one evening, a woman arrived at the shelter, clean clothes, cautious smile. Her name was Joanne. She was a volunteer counselor and part-time paralegal. Adrian didn't notice her at first, but she noticed him and she recognized him. "Weren't you?" She began one night during dinner service. "I was," he said, "but I'm not anymore." She didn't press. And over time, she began talking to him not as a ghost of fame, but as a man trying to rebuild. She became a friend. Then something more. And then came the day the ghost returned. A letter delivered to the shelter, addressed in red ink. Inside, a photo of him with Joanne, clearly taken from afar. No message. Just one line scribbled in jagged handwriting. "Even your second chance will burn." Adrian froze. He knew what this was. He had lived with its shadow for years. The revenge, the consequence, the unpaid debt. That night, he didn't sleep. Instead, he sat outside the shelter, watching the street, waiting for Gabrielle, for the hooded figure, for the bullet. Whatever was coming, but nothing came. And in that silence, he realized something. The ghosts were real, but not all of them lived outside him. Some were inside. Guilt, regret, pride. And unless he faced them, he would never be freed. So the next day he wrote a letter, not to Gabrielle, not to the feds, to Delcroft Holdings. He confessed every lie, every false document, every manipulation. He mailed it anonymously, along with the location of offshore accounts he believed were still untouched. Then he went to Malcolm and said, "I need to testify." "If they'll have me?" Malcolm nodded. That's what men do when they stop running. 2 weeks later, Adrian sat before a board of Delcroft lawyers. He told them everything. Gave them names, timelines, passwords. When they asked why, he didn't sugarcoat it. "Because I stole your trust. And if I can't give back the money, maybe I can give you closure." They didn't shake his hand, but they didn't press charges. Either. Word spread, slowly, quietly. People who had once hated him began to see the change. Not everyone forgave, not everyone believed. But some did. Today, Adrian Wallace lives in a modest apartment above the Fay shelter where he once scrubbed floors. He works part-time in urban development for a nonprofit rebuilding neighborhoods in Detroit, the same city he once nearly destroyed. He and Joanne still share dinners, still walk past skyscrapers that bear no names. Sometimes he pauses outside the Grand Lux Hotel, now owned by a corporate group. He watches businessmen walk in with briefcases, checks their shoes, their posture, their pride, and he wonders if they'll survive what he couldn't. He doesn't call himself a king anymore, just a man, flawed, broken, learning. But some nights, when the wind is quiet and the city lights flicker just right, he thinks he hears them, the ghosts, still there, but no longer chasing, just watching, waiting to see if he'll stay free.